We are live. So again, it looks like for the most part, whoever's joining us, I hope you don't have a conflict with the 8 o'clock how to talk to your kids about sexuality talk. But in case you are staying on with us and you're not going to that one I'm assured is being recorded. So that way, Efshar L'Kaim Shnehem, you can get in both things. You can learn your Torah. You can talk about sexuality. You can have everything in life that you want. So wonderful. So we're on Daled Amud Beis. We're on 4b to the first power. But actually what we're going to do tonight is we're going to briefly start with Daled Amud Aleph, because if you notice, the top of Daled Amud Beis is the beginning of the Gemara. But we might just want to quickly refresh our memories as to the Mishnah that we learned. So God willing, tonight, we're not going to learn just one Mishnah, but we're going to learn two Mishnayos together. Now, the first Mishnah is on the bottom of Daled Amud Aleph, and my goal, my hope, is that if you look at Hey Amud Aleph and Hey Amud Beis, those are both a little daunting. There's a lot of words on those pages. So I'm hoping we can make a little dent into Hey Amud Aleph tonight. That way we could get off on the right foot for next week as well. So to hopefully, to not to our dismay, but to people who are looking forward to this, like I think Phyllis and Howard, you were saying, what is all these passages about Mikvos and whatnot have to do with Makkos? Well, we're back in good old Makkos territory, and a lot of what we are going to learn tonight, I actually included in our first shiur during the introduction. Many of the concepts that I referenced are going to be found in this Gemara. So there's going to be Havaminas. It's going to be first stages of the Gemara that sound weird to us. They sound incorrect, because whatever I said at the beginning is based on the conclusion, based on how we paskin. So what we are going to talk about, it doesn't use the words explicitly, but there's a good term to know. It's called Kimle B'Derabamine. Now, anyone who's gone to yeshiva, right? So I see Henry nodding over there, right? Kimle B'Derabamine is it's a very important concept. On my bechina, on my test to get into Rav Shechter's Kollel, he just casually asked me, so no, can you tell me anything about Kimle B'Derabamine? So Baruch Hashem, I already knew the Hutra, the Chuya Machlokis, and wonderful stuff. Now, what is Kimle B'Derabamine? Kimle B'Derabamine is if I do something that would incur two separate punishments, I'd have to pay, and I would have to malchus, I'd have to get lashes. Then I only get one of them. I only get one punishment. And it's not exactly Kimle B'Derabamine we're going to see tonight. It's a different term. There's a little bit of a difference. But that's a general idea we're going to see. So remember, in Edom Zoman, they would only, let's say Zoman, they claim that Reuven killed Shimon, and then Reuven is about to be put to death, but then they are found to be Edom Zoman. So Edom Zoman, they get capital punishment, they get put to death, but they would not get Malchus also. We talk about later on about Misa Richta, but put that aside.
Get Malchus after they were put to death.
They're only put to death, they do not get the lashes, because they only get one punishment, they don't get two. So that's important to keep in mind while we learn this Mishnah. That's a very similar idea that we're going to see here, arguably the same one. So again, we're starting on the bottom.
Where does that come from?
I'm sorry, Phyllis?
That Kimle B'Derabamine or whatever.
Okay. We give him the greater of them.
I have to write it out. Where does it come from?
Where does it come from?
From what source?
So we're going to see right now from the pasuk. We're going to quote a pasuk over here, which is going to tell us that. Oh, you're going to see right here in the Mishnah, in the Gemara, really. So let's start. Let's cover a little ground. So the bottom of Daled Amud Aleph, the Mishnah. We learned this last time, so a little bit of Chazara. So two witnesses, they lied in court, they committed perjury, and what did they claim? They claimed that Reuven owes Shimon 200 zuz. So what's their punishment? According to Rabbi Meir, Lokin umishalmin, they get Malchus and they pay. This is not how we paskin. This is a minority opinion. But what's the logic? Shelo Hashem mavin lidei Makkos, mavin lidei tashlumin, divrei Meir. Because Rabbi Meir says there's two verses at play here. When I am found guilty of being an Eid Zomen, I violated the general prohibition of Losan Avrecha Eid Shaker. We read the 10 Commandments recently to Parsha Shavua and Yisro. So now we know the 9th commandment says don't bring false witnesses. So that's one violation that gives me Malchus. And I also violated the prohibition of Kasher Zamam, of being an Eid Zoman, a special type of perjurious witness, a special type of conspiring witness. So therefore, that gives me the punishment that I try to impose upon the defendant. So I get two things, Rabbi Meir says. However, the Chama Omrim Kol Mashayim Eino Loka. Once you're paying, the rule of Edom Zoman supersedes the generic punishment from Losana. So therefore, they would only pay because that's what they accuse the defendant of, but they would not have to get Malchus as well. You only get one punishment for the deed. That's case number one. Yes.
You talk about perjury.
Mm-hmm.
Perjury involves false swearing. I thought Jews are not supposed to take oaths.
Well, they don't necessarily take a shvua coming in. There is something called drisha v'chakira that the court will do general cross-examination to make sure that the witnesses' stories are consistent and line up. But they don't need to take my understanding is they don't take an oath coming in. They don't take a shvua that what they're saying is true. We only do that in special circumstances where we have reason to believe that someone is lying, such as if I bring in one witness to corroborate my position, that's not enough to win me the case, but it's enough to make the other party take an oath. Okay. Now the second part of the mission. Oh, Jenny, yes.
Sorry, and I apologize that this is probably a very beginner's question, but I want to make sure I'm understanding something.
Absolutely.
Here. So I tried looking at this ahead of time, and because I'm not familiar with reading Gemara, tell me if I'm wrong about this. Like, how do we? One of the things that I was confused about was we start reading all about Rabbi Meir and his sources and stuff like this, but I didn't have the knowledge. I thought we were introducing a new rule. So my question is really about reading the Gemara. Is the way that we are supposed to be reading this, like the Mishnah says this, and then when it says, and the rabbis say, that's how we know that's the rule because the rabbis say it? How do we know what's the rule and when we're talking about a distinction? That's my question. How do we know when there's a rule and when we're on a tangent to talk about something that's later going to be disproven? It's very hard for me to follow.
Are you asking, so there's a dispute between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, how do we know who we rule in accordance with?
Right. How did we know how it's going to turn out? Is there a way to read this so that we know how to contextualize what we're reading?
Well, the general rule is the Chachamim, you see, it's a funny thing, when I was in 5th grade and I learned Gemara for the first time, I learned Elam Mitzias. So I always thought when it said the Chachamim, the rabbis, I thought Rabbi Meir was like, was Rav Eliashiv, he was a Gadol Hador, and the Chacham were like a bunch of pulpit rabbis that got together to argue with him. So I'm like, I guess, a bunch of pulpit rabbis getting together, it equals one Gadol Hador. That was like my thinking back then.
That's not what's happening?
No, so some people,
what is it?
I was saying some people actually have my Havamina today. Some people think like that. That's for an editorial outside of Shir. But what actually means the Chachamim is that it's the consensus opinion. So the Chachamim, it's not going to specify every person took that position. The idea is Rabbi Meir is the one who leads the vanguard for the minority position, and the Chachamim, by very definition, means the consensus position. So when you see that the Rabbanim and the Chacham say
and the rabbis,
but it's not 100% true that the Chachamim, the halacha is always like the Chachamim. Usually it is, but not. There are exceptions.
Right, and that's why. So we have the Nosei Kela and we have the Gemara. Sometimes the Gemara will inform us, and other times Rishonim will inform us who we paskin like. So that's why the Talmud is one level of commentary on the Mishnah. And then we have Rashi, Tosfos, medieval commentaries, who are another level of commentary on that. And then we have Achronim, who are, 16th century and onwards, who are another level of commentary. So that's the halachic process. That's why many times we learn halakha, are like, how do I paskin? People just want to know what's say in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and the Pnei Halacha. But how did these Svarim get there? They have to go through the Gemara, they have to go through the Mishnah, go through the Gemara, go through the Rishonim, the Achronim, and eventually reach that. So there's a lot there to say that. But as Henry said, there are exceptions, but that's the general rule. Oh, we have a few other other people want to learn Gemara with us. Okay, we'll start them off young. Very good. All right, so let's move forward. A very similar principle is going to play out here. That if we have, they say that Ploni, the defendant, did something that would incur Malchus, lashes. Malchus are blind, and Imsu Zomen, they're found to be Im Zomen. Lokin Shmonim, Mishum Losana Vrayache Shaker, Umishum Vasisam Lokashu Zamam Divrei Meir. Right? Meir says that they get punished. They get one set of lashes for violating Losana, the generic issue, and Vasisam Lokashu Zamam being Adam Zomen, Divrei Rabbi Meir. So they get two sets of lashes. Same principle at work. I violated 2 psukim. I get 2 punishments. You only get 1 set because you only get punished for asisim lo kasher zaman. You do not get punished for losana because that supersedes it. That is the Mishnah. And we learned that last time briefly at the end, but hopefully that background will help us for the Gemara, because what's the Gemara going to ask now? Well, the Gemara is going to ask, what is the basis of this dispute between the Rabbanan, I'll use interchangeably, Rabbanan, Chachamim, it's the same thing, it just means the rabbis. So what is the distinction? Why are they arguing? It seems almost arbitrary. What's the logic behind their positions? So I don't know if you have it in your Gemaras, we have the Torah Or HaShalem. We've quoted this pasuk many times. He should get punished Kidei Rishaso, according to the evil that he committed. Kidei Rishaso ksiv, Mishum Risha Achas Mechayvo, Viata Mechayvo Mishum Shtei Rishuyos. It says in the pasuk in singular, he should get punished according to his evil deed. Not so that we infer from there, you get punished one time around, you don't get punished for 2 violations for that single act. That is the position of the Chachamim. Ella, but now, okay, the Chachamim make a persuasive point. That's a great inference from the verse, a good close reading. Now, why would Rabbi Meir disagree with them? So Rabbi Meir says, Inachinami, that's a really great reading of the pasuk, but I have a different source that tells me otherwise. El Rabbi Meir, my taima, Amar Ula Gomer Mi Motzi Shemra. He derives this from the Parsha Motzi Shemra. Now, those who are with us in the Bible from the beginning Sunday class, this is where our studies pay off. We learned a good amount of months ago about Motzi Shemra. Motzi Shemra is if a man comes to court and he falsely accuses his wife of committing infidelity, and they know that he set it all up, and he was doing it because he wanted to keep the ksuba when he divorces her, whatever his reasons are. So for Motzi Shemra, he gets 2 things. A, he has to compensate her monetarily for the humiliation and casting aspersions on her reputation. And number 2, he also gets malchus for it. So Rabbi Meir says, look, maybe Motzi Shemra is a precedent. Maybe it's a paradigm. Ma Motzi Shemra loke mishalim, af kol loke mishalim. The same way for Motzi Shemra, you could get malchus and pay. It's fair to assume that the Torah is okay with someone committing 1 evil deed but getting 2 punishments, paying and getting malchus from it. So it should be the same case for Adam Zoman, Rabbi Meir says.
But he's doing 2 different things. It's 2 different acts, actually.
Motzi Shemra? No, it just you're just coming into court and you were falsely accusing your wife of committing an infidelity. It's only
you're falsely accusing is one, and the second one is ruining her reputation is 2.
Well, it's a compensation for the damage to her reputation. It's not a punishment.
But
it's only 1 action, though. That's the important. I understand what you're saying. There's multiple, but that's the whole idea. There might be multiple results, but it's 1 evil deed. That's the idea. I only said, 1 sentence.
It's simultaneous. If it happens simultaneously, that's the trigger.
Wait, let's just do 1 at a time. Like I said, Henry's saying simultaneous. I understand that, Zadie.
Yeah, it's not a second punishment when he has to pay money. He's compensating her for her loss.
Right.
It's a damage payment.
Right, but he's actually committing 2 sins.
Right, but the issue over here is that it's not that you might be doing that there are 2 bad outcomes. It's that you committed 1 evil deed, yet because of what you're doing, you get still punishment of payment and a punishment of malchus. So that's all we need to derive from here, that it's possible to do one thing and yet pay and get malchus. So too, why not Adam Zoman as well? So here's the thing. I don't know if Motzi Shemra is the best paradigm. Why? Motzi Shemra shechein knas. Motzi Shemra, you're not reimbursing her. You don't have a debt to pay her. Why are you paying her? It's a knas. It's punitive. It's a penalty payment. It's a penalty to have to pay her. So, but Adam Zomamin is not a knas. So how can I derive Adam Zomamin from Motzi Shemra? Oh, well, here's an easy answer. If we remember, we do a little chazara. Savrla Rabbi Akiva with Adam Zomin knasahu. Remember our good old friend Rabbi Akiva? Back on what was it? It was Beis Amid Beis, I think we learned it on. Rabbi Akiva told us, yes, that's right, on the bottom of Beis Amid Beis, we learned that when Adam Zomin get punished, it's punitive. It's a knas. It's a penalty payment that they are giving. So Motzi Shemra is an excellent paradigm because Motzi Shemra, when it comes to Motzi Shemra, he is getting punished. He's paying as a penalty. So too for Adam Zoman, it's a penalty as well. Therefore, Rabbi Meir concludes you could pay and get malchus. That is Rabbi Meir's point. I'll just take any questions for clarification purposes so we can cover some ground. Is there anything I could clarify on that?
Okay, we're talking about his wife. He's damaged her reputation. She suffered a loss. This is an economic compensation that he's paying to her. It's not a punishment. She's entitled to be made whole. She's made whole by financial compensation.
Right. So from a strict monetary standpoint, had he made her lose the ksuba, meaning if he actually took it, then paying back would be considered like a debt. However, here he didn't actually accomplish anything. So it's viewed as a knas, though I hear the point you're saying, which is, look, maybe it's not a knas. Maybe he caused her certain damages by ruining her reputation, and he's compensating her accordingly, right? There's defamation lawsuits out there. So maybe it's a compensation, but it seems the Gemara is assuming it's a knas. Okay, let's go forward. We're only like a quarter way down the Amud. So this statement by Ula was the one who introduced the idea of using Motzi Shemra as a halachic paradigm. He used it to explain Rabbi Meir's position for getting malchus and for tashlumin, for payments. But also some say that Ula's precedent of Motzi Shemra was used in another halachic discussion as well. So we're going to break off into a little bit of a tangent to see where Motzi Shemra also serves our purposes, but it's not a huge tangent like Makkos. It's still within our general sugya. Okay. Ika damasni laha de Ula ha de Tanya. Ula's statement was also applied to the following brisa. Lo sosir mimenu ad boker, vanoser mimenu ad boker, be'esh tisrofu. So there is an idea called nosar. Nosar is that karbanos have a time limit. So some karbanos, some sacrifices, the person bringing the sacrifice eats from it. And if you do not eat it within the requisite amount of time, then you are required to burn the remaining meat that you failed to fulfill the mitzvah of eating. Ba kasolitin asay acher lo sasay lo marshe lokin lav direi Rabbi Yehuda. So really, Rabbi Yehuda says in this brisa that if I fail to eat the carbon meat, then really I should get malchus for that. I violated the prohibition. I didn't eat the meat, but only because the Torah came along and said it's called a la panitik laseh. You can sort of rectify that action by burning the meat, by doing a positive mitzvah of burning. Therefore, you won't be held accountable as far as malchus are concerned. If there's a negative avera you commit, but the Torah gives you a positive mitzvah to rectify it, then you do not get malchus for that negative avera that you violated. So that's why Rabbi Yehuda says one doesn't get malchus for leaving over nosar. However, Rabbi Akiva Omer, lo min Hashem huzeh, that's not the reason why you don't get malchus for nosar. Everyone agrees you don't get malchus for nosar. The question is why. So Akiva says This is a principle I think we're familiar with at this point. Also, a few weeks ago on Beis Amid Beis, Rabbi Akiva told us that, I mean, imagine not every sin someone commits incurs Malkus. Otherwise, I mean, like imagine like the Beis HaMikdash is up again, the Sanhedrin's back in the court, and every time you accidentally, well, I guess flipping the light on Shabbos isn't good. You flip on an incandescent lamp on Shabbos. So what, you're going to get Malkus for it? Well, actually, Shabbos, you get killed for it. That's not a good example. But the point being is that not every sin that somebody commits gives them Malkus. What kind of sins do give Malkus? Or rather, what don't? If it's a lav shein bo maisa, if I commit a sin, but I don't do an action to commit that sin, then I don't get Malkus for it. And we said it's logical because it's mida keneged mida. If I perform a sinful action, a punitive action is done in response. But if I didn't do an action that's problematic, there's not going to be an action done to me to punish me for doing that. I think it's logical. It makes sense. It's reciprocal. So here's the thing. The fact that Rabbi Akiva gave the reason, when it comes to nosar, I leave the meat over past the due date of when I was supposed to eat it. I don't get malchus because I passively violated it. I didn't actively violate the prohibition. Michlal, do Rabbi Yehuda savar lav shein bo ma'aseh lo. Why didn't Rabbi Yehuda give the same reason as Rabbi Akiva? Because Rabbi Yehuda must hold, we infer that he holds, that you get malchus even for a lav that has no maisa, no action associated with it. Wow, so in Rabbi Yehuda's base then, they were cracking out the Makkos for lots of sins people were committing. Imagine that. Now here's the thing, that's a radical position of Rabbi Yehuda, right? We can imagine that. So the Gemara is going to ask me, Nole, okay, back up your position. Where does Rabbi Yehuda get such a far-reaching interpretation of the application of Malchus? So this is where our friend Ula comes back into play. Amar Ula, Gamar mi Motzi Shemra. We use Motzi Shemra as our halachic paradigm. Ma Motzi Shemra lav shem bo ma'aseh lokin alav. Av kol lav shem bo ma'aseh lokin alav. Motzi Shemra, all I did was dibor. I spoke. I falsely accused my wife, but I didn't commit an action. Speaking is not considered an action in halacha. One could do bad things, like Motzi Shemra with speaking, but that's not considered an action. An action needs to be something more physical, not communicative. So if Motzi Shemra is not an action, yet as we established earlier, you could get malchus for it for committing Motzi Shemra. So too over here as well for nosar. Sorry, not for nosar, but nosar is an exception for another reason. But in general, in kol Torah kula, maybe I could get punished even on a lav she'ein bo ma'isa, even for a sin that has no associated action. So that is what we are using Ula for his Motzi Shemra precedent to get malchus in many more cases. But here's the thing, Motzi Shemra, maybe Motzi Shemra is not the rule, but maybe it's the exception that proves the rule. After all, Mala Motzi Shemra shechein lokim mishalem. Remember what we learned earlier? Motzi Shemra, you get malchus and you pay. How many sins can we count that you get malchus and you have to pay tashlumin? Maybe Motzi Shemra is unique. We see it's already more severe. We see it's yotzei min haklal. We see it's exceptional in regard that you get two punishments for it. So maybe it doesn't serve as a good paradigm. It's just the exception that proves the rule. But in general, you don't get malchus for lav shein bo ma'aseh. So Elmar Rish Lakish, Gamar made him zomamin. So great. You know what? Why don't we use our good old Edom Zoman as the paradigm to show us that you could get malchus even when you don't commit an action? Edom Zoman, right? Also, speech. They commit perjury. They don't do any action that's problematic. So maybe we could use them as our precedent. Mayim Zoman lav shein bo ma'aseh lokin alav. Av kol lav shein bo ma'aseh lokin alav. Just like Edom Zoman, they could get malchus even though they didn't do any action that's problematic. Maybe in kol Torah kula, I can get punished for any lav that doesn't have an action associated with it, but but it's a lav, just like Edom Zomamin. So what do we make of that then? Maybe Edom Zomamin should serve as the paradigm for getting malchus when you don't commit a bona fide action. The issue with Edom Zomamin, also similar to Motzi Shemra, is maybe Edom Zomamin, again, is an exception that proves the rule. Mal Edom Zomamin shechein ain't srikan hasra. Edom Zomamin, they don't need hasra. What's hasra? Hasra is getting warned before you commit an act, so you get punished for it. So generally, one of the reasons it's very hard to mete out capital punishment in Jewish court is because if I'm about to murder somebody, I need to be warned beforehand. I need to be warned by the witnesses not to do it. Now, how many cases can you think of a murder where there's two witnesses standing by, like, you better not do that, otherwise the Beis Din will execute you for it. And he's like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. And then he kills him like Tokadei Dibor. We're going to talk about this later on. Very hard, like he'll probably shoot the witnesses also. So it's very hard to have all the right details line up. And this is going to be a future shiur that we'll get to in Makkos, talking about the conditions for capital punishment. But Edom Zomamin is unique, that the Edom Zomamin do not need to be warned prior to committing their hazama, their perjury in court. So here's the thing. Edom Zomamin might not be our best paradigm either, because Edom Zomamin also have a uniquely stringent quality to them, that they don't even need hasra, but they could be indicted and that they could be punished by the Beis Din. But the rest of Kol Torah Kula, where you do need hasra to be punished, we can't learn from Edom Zomamin the principle that you get punished even for doing something that doesn't have an action involved. Edom Zomamin, we clearly see, is a category unto itself, like Motzi Shemra. So what are we going to? Yes, Henry.
I don't know the reason why Edom Zomamin don't need the warning. Is there a specific?
Why was the reason they don't need the warning? So I mean, Rashi references Gemara and Ksuba. Ksuba Amir and Taima Beilu Nairos. We'd have to look over there. But it's the Gemara and Ksubas Alama Gil Amid Aleph. I didn't look up beforehand.
Okay, never mind. Okay, I was just curious. Okay.
You can look it up in Ksubos and it'll tell us, but it's a good question. Okay. So now what are we going to do? What happens when we have two great paradigms, but each one doesn't work on its own? So this is a very important Talmudic concept we're gonna learn right now. It's called a Tzad Hashava. What Tzad Hashava basically means is, remember how Edom Zomamin is unique because it doesn't require, they don't require hasra, and Motzi Shemra is unique because you get malchus and you get two punishments for it, two unique punishments. Well, maybe those are red herrings. You see, we were trying to say we can't use them as halachic paradigms to learn, just like they get malchus for not committing an action, so too everywhere all these lavin get malchus, even when there's no action associated with them. Well, we said maybe they have unique stringencies, which show us that they are set apart from the rest of the crowd when it comes to sins. Well, the thing is, maybe these stringencies they have are really just red herrings. It's a fluke. They also happen to, Edom Zomamin happens to not require hasra. Motzi Shemra happens to also get two punishments. Now, how do we know that they're red herrings? Because if I have two things, I have Edom Zomamin, which doesn't have the quality of Motzi Shemra, right? Because we hold like the Chachamim, you could only get one or the other, you're either paying or getting malchus. And Motzi Shemra also doesn't have the quality of Edom Zomamin, that also when it comes to Hasra. So what we say is Motzi Shemra Yochiach. We're on second wide line. V'chazar din lo rizeh krizeh, v'lo rizeh krizeh. They're not like each other. Rather, hatzara shava shebehen, la shebo ma'isa v'lo. What's the common denominator between Motzi Shemra and Edom Zomamin? They might both be unique in their own ways. But one thing, right? If you're drawing the what's the thing with the overlaps called? The right? You have two circles. The Venn diagram. Thank you, Toby.
The common denominator.
Common denominator, the Venn diagram. Excellent. Both are correct. So if you have this Venn diagram and you put Motzi Shemra on one circle and you put Edom Zomamin in the other circle, in the middle, what do they have in common? They have in common that they're both alav shem bo ma'isa lokna. They're both non-actions that get you malchus. So we could use them together to teach us that they both might be coming from different walks of life. But one thing that they both can tell us is that you get Makkos for Lav Shem Bo Ma'isa, and therefore any third Isser that comes along also, you should get Malkus, even though there is no action for it. So that is
When you say no action,
What
Rabbi,
else?
when you say no action, you mean like not murdering somebody or
I mean a
physically?
physical
You mean
action,
physical?
meaning
Physical
doesn't
action.
qualify.
I mean, because you can murder somebody with your mouth too.
You mean like
The
you should
Torah
like shoot a
says.
poison dart out of your mouth at him or something, or
No. What is it? Malbin pnei chavero chayam, or whatever, or motzi shem ra chayam
correct. From
mita
an
or
ethical
something.
standpoint,
To murder
humiliating.
somebody.
You know, Phyllis, I'll tell you, I was once, so that's more from an ethical standpoint than from a strict legal based and oriented standpoint. So, you know, the suggestion you're giving me reminds me, I remember after my Shanaf and Shalavim, I spent a summer in Morris Shah Beit Midrash program. So I had this kid who came in who wanted to learn. We gave them free food if they came in to learn during the day. It's actually kind of where you're offering the kids free food so they come in and learn. But anyway, it's totally okay. So it's a populated based medrash. So we learned one-on-one with kids who wanted free food. They come in, they learn, they get their Laffy Taffies, whatever. So the kid asked me a question. He said, why does base never have to kill anybody? Can't they we learned that there are 4 kinds of people that are considered, they're next Shav Mason. They're considered as if they're already dead. One of those people is someone who has no money. That's what we learned, that Yaakov, Eliphaz, who was Esav's son, I believe. Am I mixing it up? So he robs Yaakov. So Eliphaz comes, he robs Yaakov. He comes back to Esav and says, I killed Yaakov. What do you mean? He didn't kill Yaakov. No, he robbed Yaakov. Robbing someone and taking all their livelihood is like killing them. So the kid's suggestion, he said, why can't Basin just, instead of doing capital punishment, take away that guy's money instead and leave him alive? So the answer is those statements by Chazal are more for a Saturday morning sermon and less for the Thursday morning Gemara shir, so to speak. Meaning there's an ethical message behind it, but it doesn't really work in terms of, from a judicial standpoint. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
That's a very long way of answering your question, but I thought
For
it
clarifying it. Thank you for clarifying. No, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, so now just to reorient ourselves. So we were saying there's a Tzad Shava, Motzi Shemra and Aim Zomin. What do they both have in common? They both have in common that they're Lav Shem Bo Ma'isa, that's a sin with no bona fide action. It's only dibur, only words, yet you get Malkus for it anyway. So let's use that as a paradigm and extrapolate it to Kol HaTorah Kula, to all the other sins without actions that come up. The thing is, the Gemara says, whoa, don't jump right into the Tzad Shava. Now you can't just think that you can ride out into the sunset. We're not going to let you off that easily. But Motzi Shemra and Im Zomin, what do they have in common? They're both knasos. The money you have to pay from them are both categorized, or the punishments, are punitive. They're not debts. They are penalties rather. So maybe, you can't generalize it to the rest of the Torah. You would only be able to generalize it to other punishments that are given out as a knas. So it wouldn't work for Rabbi Yehuda's purposes, who wants to make an across-the-board statement that you get punished for Malkus on everything, even if it doesn't have a Maisa associated with it. So Halo Kasha, Rabbi Yehuda L'Savla Krei Kiva. Here's a very easy answer. Rabbi Yehuda is entitled to a disagreement because Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva are allowed to disagree. Rabbi Akiva was the one who held that Einim Zomin is a knas. Rabbi Yehuda says Einim Zomin is not a knas. It's not a penalty payment. It's something else. I remember we talked about Vachana Wasserman in our first week. So we said it's not a knas, just based and made a verdict. It has to go to somebody. It can't go to the defendant anymore. So who should it go to? Rightfully so, it should go to the 2 witnesses who helped create the verdict to begin with. But it's not a punishment. It's not a penalty. So I'm just going to finish this one line, and then I have a period in my Gemara in the Oz V'Hadar edition. So it's a good stopping point. I'll take questions. So but now the Gemara, it's getting desperate. The Gemara says, well, maybe Aim Zomin and Motzi Shemra are both unique. They don't share the same chumrah, the same stringencies, but same unique qualities, but they both have a tzad chamor to them. That Aim Zoma can be indicted without hasra, without being warned. And Motzi Shemra, you get two punishments. They might not be the same, but they both have something unique to them. So shouldn't the tzad hashava fall apart? Nope. Rabbi Yehuda tzad chamor lo parech. They need to share the same chumrah, the same stringency that makes them unique from the rest of the crowd. If they don't share the same chumrah, and their point of commonality is what we're trying to learn out, meaning over here, that alav sheba ma'isa lokin alav, that you commit an act, a non-action that gets you Makkos, that is what we'll derive. Again, the Venn diagram, Motzi Shemer on one side, Ein Zoma on the other side, they'll have their red herrings, their own unique qualities to it, but in the end of the day, they could come together in unity and achdus and tell us that you could commit a lav shem bo ma'isa, you can commit an action, a non-action, and get Malchus for it. Ah, isn't that the unity that we need, right? All right. Jenny, you had a question.
Yes. I'm in the Sefaria right before clause 8. It says, so too, with regard to any prohibition that does not involve an action, one is flogged for its violation. Great. So Aiden Zomerman in that case would be flogged. But then the next line says, the Gemara asks this question, what's notable about their common denominator? They're notable that payment in both cases is a fine. So I'm confused as to why the punishment sounds like it's sometimes flogging for Aiden Zomerman and then sometimes a fine. It feels like there was a jump here that I didn't understand.
So I think it means Aiden Zomerman so Aiden Zomerman could be a variety of things. Aiden Zomerman sometimes Malchus, it's sometimes Tashlumen, it's payment, a fine, sometimes capital punishment. So I think what it means here is that even when you're obviously Malchus and capital punishment is punitive, but the Chiddush, what it's telling us is that even when you're paying as an Zoman, that money is not considered initially to be compensatory, but it's actually first categorized as a fine. That's the idea.
Gotcha. So they're making the distinction between whether it be right. So the word fine here, it's not about whether it's monetary versus corporal. It's the situation between being restitutive versus punitive.
Absolutely. And because
Thank
Malchus, I mean, lashes by very definition are punitive. That's what they are. I mean, of course, when you get capital punishment and you get Malchus, there is an idea that one does tshuva when it's supposed to, based in Sanhedrin. I know Zadie, you learned Sanhedrin already beforehand, so you have all the background information. But I'll fill it in for those of us who didn't get through it like myself. So in Sanhedrin, it tells us.
How much I remember from it.
What was that?
The question is how much do I remember? That's
okay. So that's why we're doing a little chazara right now. So the chazara is that based in, before they put someone to death, they ask him to do last confessions, that he does vidoy and he admits to his sins. The idea behind capital punishment isn't just to remove a menace to society, but sometimes people commit such egregious sins that the death penalty is part of the tshuva process. If one looks, and maybe we'll do this next year before high holidays, go through Rambam Hilchos Tshuva, Rambam outlines certain kind of sins and how one, based on Mishanas and Yoma, how one atones for them. So some sins are so egregious that it needs to be coupled with the death penalty. But anyway, they're both considered punitive. That's the idea. And the money here also is punitive. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, the money is not punitive. Therefore, Adam Zoman and Motzi Shemer have no common ground, except for the fact that they're both non-actions that get Malchus. And therefore, we could generalize it to the rest of the Torah as well. So Shalma Yisrael, we can start doling out all the Makkos for all the different kinds of sins out there. Lovely. Okay. Any other questions before we go forward? Okay, great. This is exciting. We're about to get to the next Mishnah. One more section. So remember, this was all on the first part of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah was that it was talking about where you have to pay for being a Zoman and you get Malchus for Losana. The second part of the Mishnah was getting two sets of Malchus. Again, one for Losana, the 9th commandment, and one for the Parsha of Adam Zomerman. So remember, the Rameir says you just get two sets of Malchus. The Rabbanan say you still only get one. The question here is Rabbanan Hai Losana V'Rachei Shakar My Darshibe. What do they do with the pasuk of Losana? how can they just disregard Losana and only look at Kasher Zamam? So it's important is the Rashash, he points out that why didn't we ask this question earlier, right? Why didn't we just ask at the beginning of the Gemara on the first section of Mishnah, why are the rabbis ignoring the 9th commandment of Losana? How did they just throw it out the window? So we have to answer Kedei Rashaso. But really, here, this is an answer for this area because maybe I need Kedei Rashaso to tell me that when it comes to two separate, qualitatively separate punishments, Tashlumin, payment, and Makkos, corporal punishment, there I could say you only get one category of punishment. You don't get two categories. But here, we're not adding a different kind of category. We're just increasing the quantity of the same punishment. Instead of one set of 39 lashes, you get two sets of 39 lashes. So even according to Rabbanan, they really shouldn't be able to say Kimle B'Derabba Mine. They shouldn't be able to say that. We have many times, we'll see later in Makkos, where you could do one action that has multiple sins involved, and you get Makkos for each and every one. We're going to talk about a case later on in Makkos where you're tilling a field during the Shemitah year, you're not allowed to work a field, and you're a Kohen, and it's also a graveyard, and you have two different kinds of animals pulling it together. It's basically like counts of like, I forgot, like 7, 8 sins or so that you get punished for. Henry, you remember the exact amount? Or, oh, you're muted. Oh, you're muted, Henry. Okay, I'm assuming you're filling me in on a number or something that I forgot. So Yasher Koach. Okay. So
I don't remember all 8, but like you're wearing shatnez and you're doing all sorts of things at the same time.
right,
And
it shows like how many things you could violate just in one action, and you get punished. So if one does, so the thing here though is really I should get 2 sets of Malkus according to this. So what's different over here? Really, the Rabbanan in principle agree. Really, you should be getting 2 sets of Malkus even according to Rabbanan, but they need to use the pasuk of Losana for something else. And we are about to learn a concept that will need to stay with us throughout our journeys of Maseches Makkos. Hahumi voile li azhara le'edim zomamin. We need this as an azhara. What is an azhara? This is if you're taking notes, write this down. We got to remember this. An azhara. I'll just explain this. An azhara means as follows. We've been learning the pasuk of Asitin lo kasher zamam. It tells us what happens when you commit this sin. But it's weird because we need a pasuk to first tell us that you're not allowed to commit perjury. We only have a pasuk. If all I had was Vasisim lo kasher zamam, I would only have a pasuk telling me that here's the punishment for committing perjury. But the Torah first needs to tell me, thou shalt not commit perjury, in order so that the pasuk of punishing me for perjury applies later on. So the first pasuk, Lo Sana Brechi and Shakar, 9th commandment, that serves as an azhara. That's where the Torah says, thou shalt not commit perjury. And then the pasuk of Edom Zomamin teaches me the punishment for being Edom Zomamin. So the reason the Chachamim say you don't get a second set of Malkus from Losana is because Losana serves as the azhara. And then afterwards, the pasuk of Kasher Zaman tells me what the punishment is for violating that Isser. That's the idea. So now we understand why there's only one set of Malkus. Phyllis and Toby.
Rabbi, going back to
Oh, sorry, I had a lag.
Going back to the first.
It's okay.
Should I go?
Toby can go first.
I think I was like 5 things behind
back
you.
to the first paragraph in the Mishnah, though. Going back to the first paragraph in the Mishnah, how do they decide if it could be one or the other? How do they decide which one you're getting?
How do you decide how do you decide if you're getting?
In other words, if you could be getting Makkos or paying a fine, but you're only going to get one, how is it decided which one?
Right. So the general rule is that Edom Zomin is a special kind of perjurious witness. So therefore, the Losana is the generic punishment, And Ein Zomen supersedes the generic case. So that's why you pay and you don't get Malkus, because Malkus comes from the generic punishment, and the payment is from the Ein
Oh, so that's
Zomen.
always the case. Okay.
That's the general principle. Right.
Okay.
Now, if we were
Got it.
talking about a standard case of Kimle B'Deravine, that would not be the case, actually. That's what makes this unique. In a regular case where I do something, like here's the case. Let's say I shoot an arrow at somebody and it tears his clothing, and then it also happens to kill him at the same time. Right? I think, Henry, you were there between the Chamar one time, maybe, when I talked about this in
Oh,
Shul.
it's a good public comment, I think. Yeah, right. That's the classic case.
So I kill him, and I also happen to tear his clothing. So I only get capital punishment. I don't, Basin will not force me to pay to his estate, to his family. So here is unique because here I'm paying, but I'm not getting corporal punishment. Usually it's the reverse.
Mhm.
So that's what's unique about Ein Zomen superseding the general Losana. And that's what makes it different than general Kimle B'Deravine. Just throw in that tidbit. Anyway, now that we oh, sorry, Phyllis.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the low time there, you said is a warning. If it didn't say low time there, so you might not know that you were doing something wrong, right?
It would mean that you would not be able to get Malkus for it.
Yeah, because it sounds like you didn't know, so you didn't knowingly commit some, a sin. So, but that doesn't work in the Torah all the time. So it's very strange to me. Like Nadav and Avihu didn't know not to bring a strange fire into the Beis HaMikdash. Cain didn't know that he wasn't supposed to murder his brother. He wasn't told before.
Very good points. And it's a more general question beyond the scope of what we're talking about. What did people do before the Torah itself was given? How could we hold people accountable if they didn't have the Torah?
Abraham knew the Torah, supposedly.
Right.
So.
I mean, maybe general principles, but then the rest of the nations. So it's a great question, Phyllis. I'm not equipped to thoroughly answer it right now, but the point here is that an azhara serves a very mechanical, legalistic purpose. The rule is that in order to give malchus, there needs to be an azhara for it, and then a pasuk telling you as well that here is the punishment for committing whatever that sin is.
Wouldn't witnesses testifying before the Beit Din be warned right at the time before they're called up to the stand? Like, hey, you're not supposed to perjure yourself. Like we do that in American court.
So there's a difference. Very good, Jenny. So there's a difference between azhara and hasra. We learned two new terms tonight that we got to remember. They sound the same, but they're actually different. Hasra is the warning that witnesses will give to someone before they perpetrate an action, a sin. And azhara is the warning written in the Torah itself. So, and actually, when it comes to Ein Zomen, that's what we learned is that they don't need hasra. They will be held accountable even if they don't get hasra. So that's something important to know as well. Anyway, let's just, we have a few minutes left, so let's make sure we cover the ground we need to cover. Rabbi Meir, Asar Leim Zon Minale. So great. But if Rabbi Meir is using the pasuk Losana to teach us that you get another set of malchus, what's his source for the azhara for Ein Zomen? So Rabbi Yirmiyah Nafkale Mevanisharim Yishmu B'Yurav Lo Yisivu Od. He derives it from the pasuk in Dvarim, where it says, those who are remaining will listen and they will see and they will know when they see the Ein Zomen punish that they should not commit that action themselves. So that's his source for an azhara. Rabbanan. Wait, it's such a great source for an azhara. Why didn't the Rabbanan choose to use it? They use it. Here's the third term we're learning tonight. Hachraza. We have three terms that sound the same but mean three different things. Hachraza is to announce. Right, so those who learned, I remember I said in 5th grade in Darche, I learned Elu Mitzias. So we learn Yishlom Das, right? So Chayev Lahachris or Eno Chayev Lahachris. When I find a lost object, am I obligated to announce it or am I not obligated to announce it publicly that it was lost? That's what Hachraza is. So what based in Rashi points out, based on, again, in Maseches Sanhedrin, is that if someone, when they're bringing out the person to be killed, Srichin Hachraza La'achar Shenenshu, based in Srichin based in La'achar Kafakach, Nerag Ploni, but based in Alavir Plonis, today Laranos es Hashomin. Based in will announce why this person was brought to death, in order to instill in the hearts of all who see it, basically to make an example out of him and say, you don't want to wind up like Joe over there. So the Rabbanan, sorry, not the Rabbanan. No, the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan used this pasuk as a source for hachraza, for a new idea. Rabbi Meir. So where does Rabbi Meir get the source for hachraza for? Hachraza miyishma v'yiro nafka. He goes back to that pasuk on the bottom of Dalam Beis. He says, I derive it from the first words of Vanisharim Yishmu v'yiro. Those who remaining will hear and see and become to fear because of it. Lo Yosifu Od. And then he uses Lo Yosifu Od as the source for the Ashara. So just quickly to review, 3 new terms we learned tonight. It might be worth writing them down if you're taking any form of notes. There is Hasra. Hasra is what witnesses will warn somebody not to do something before they commit the sin. If they don't listen to
Not
the
in writing.
they're punished. Then there is Azhara. Azhara is in order for someone to get a Makkos or corporal punishment of any sort, there needs to be a warning in the Torah that that's a bad thing. Don't do it.
That's a written warning.
And then there's hachraza. Hachraza is number 3. That term means that based on after they do capital punishment on somebody, they should announce why this person was punished.
Rabbi, could you just repeat the last term again one more time?
Yes, hachraza. The first one, Hayam and Aleph. On Hayam and Aleph, hachraza means to announce. So they announce why this person was put to death, and they say, don't wind up like that guy. Okay. So I guess here's the question. Should we try to cover a little more ground in the last few minutes? Does that sound like a good plan? It'll go. This next part's very easy. Okay, let's cover a little bit of ground. This Mishnah, so I see, right, we have Gloria, Phyllis, some of our Friday Mishnah crew, and Marina as well, I think. Anyone else who I'm not giving a shout out, you'll forgive me. So we learned this Mishnah already in the Friday group, so you remember this. Mishal Sheba Mamon ve Mishal Sheba Makkos. Here's a term that we've learned before, that we split up. So if Adam Zoman, you have 2 Adam Zoman, 3 Adam Zoman, they are found guilty of committing Hazama. They split up money, but they do not split up the Malkus that they get. Ketzad, what's the case? If someone, if they testified someone is chayav 200 zuz to someone else, but it's a zoman, they're found to be Adam Zomamen. Mishalshin beinehem, they could split the money between them. We'll talk in the Gemara why. But conversely, if they accuse that person of doing something which would incur malchus, then they cannot split up the 39 lashes, right? Imagine there's 3 witnesses. They'll say, you take 13, I'll take 13, you take 13. So that way, if we're found being Zoom in the end, it's easier to split between the 3 of us. Not going to work. Each one's going to get 39 lashes. Unlike money, which they could split 3 ways. Now,
Didn't we
what
have
is
this Mishnah?
this?
Yeah,
Is the
sounds
Mishnah.
familiar.
New Mishnah.
No, but weren't these concepts stated like at the beginning of the?
Yeah, exactly. So we referenced this in the Gemara already. It came up on Gimel Amud Aleph, I believe. So your memory serves us right. So the Gemara, because the Gemara was written a few hundred years after the Mishnayos, so the Gemara already referenced this Mishnah before we actually got up to it. So that's why this Mishnah should go by so quickly, because the Gemara actually referenced this idea beforehand. But this time around, we're going to explain what's the rationale. So if you give me literally 2 more minutes, we should be able to finish this. Minahani mili, why do we distinguish between that you can split money, but you can't split the malchus between the witnesses? 2 different approaches. Amar Abai. Nemar Rasha b'chayve malchus. Nemar Rasha b'chayve mises beistin. We have a Gezerah Shava. Use the term Rasha, a wicked person, in regards to malchus, and in regards to death penalties in court. The same way, you can't split a death penalty between 2 people. You can't make them half dead. I mean, if you watch The Lord of the Rings, the Nazguls are technically half alive, half dead, but it doesn't work in Bastin. So too, malchus, you can't split between them as well. We learned that because logically, you can't split a death penalty. So too, we learn from there that Malchus also doesn't get split because there is a hermeneutical connection between the two in the verses that they both share the word Russia. That's Abayi's approach. Rava's approach is as follows. Rava says, Rava Amar Ba'inan Kasher Zaun Lasus Lachi Veleka. You need to get, remember that we learned some Beis Malav at the beginning. You need to get the same punishment that you tried to cause to the defendant. But if you're not getting the exact punishment, then that's not a fulfillment of a Sisim Lo Kasher Zaman. So that's why you can't split Malchus. If I only get 13 lashes, that's not a punishment of Malchus. Well, Ihachi Mamonami. Great question from the Gemara. If so, each witness should have to pay 200 zuz. Why do they get away with that? They shouldn't be able to split it between them. Right? They each need to pay 200 zuz. It should be. Why are they allowed to split it between them? That's not the same thing. The defendant would have to foot the whole bill on his own. Why do they get to split it up? So the Gemara says, Mamon mitzdarif, Malchus lo mitzdarif. Doesn't really answer a question. Money combines, Malchus cannot be combined. Now we're all shaking our heads like Toby just did, and I'm like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. And I'll try to give you an answer, and you'll tell me if you find it satisfactory. The idea behind Mammon, what are they accusing Reuven of? That Reuven owed Shimon $200. So it's a compensatory payment. It's a debt. Therefore, Malchus, which is a punishment, you can't split it between them. But the idea is Reuven was chayiv to Shimon. That's what they claimed. So Reuven's, had they not been proven false, what would Reuven have to do? Reuven would just have to make sure that 200 zuz winds up in the pocket of Shimon at the end of the day. Reuven could ask his friend, he could ask his parents, he could ask his neighbor to pay it off for him. But his goal is to make sure $200 wind up in Shimon's pocket. So the witnesses, when they get accused of it, and now there's 200 zuz owed to Reuven, it's not that each one is obligated to pay 200 zuz. It's that they are collectively have the same din that 200 zuz needs to wind up in Reuven's pocket. However, they ensure that it winds up there, that's fine. They can get someone else to pay on their behalf even. So that's the difference when it comes to Malchus. Malchus is a one category punishment. If I get Malchus, I get Malchus. Malchus by definition, it's 39 lashes. It can be adjusted depending on conditions, but it's 39 lashes standard. But when it comes to the money, it's compensatory. And therefore, as long as 200 zuz winds up in Reuven's pocket, that is the goal. Therefore, they're able to split it. That's what the Gemara means when it says, Momo mitzdaref, Malchus lo mitzdaref. Yasher koach, everyone. Thank you for staying on 3 minutes later. You are all welcome to go. Have a wonderful Shabbos. And as usual, I'll stay on.
Thank you. Chodesh Tov. In a Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov as well. Yes. Remember, y'all.
Rabbi, I answered your email.
Oh, okay. I'll take a look. Thank you, Toby.
Sure.
Okay.
Good night, everybody, and good Shabbos.
Good night.
Good Shabbos, good Chodesh.
Anyone have any questions I should remain on for, or? Okay.
I still don't like that last answer,
I
but
don't like that last answer, Toby.
no, it just because then, then let's just get, 5 people together to do this false testimony, and then the potential
up in New York.
liability is so much
Yeah.
less, and it just doesn't seem right to be able to finagle like that.
I
Each
feel like
have to be responsible for the full.
right.
And
So,
if Shimon ends up with double the money, good, because he's been publicly embarrassed. He's gone through the agony of having to, go to, being accused of something that wasn't true. He should get double compensation. It shouldn't be just what he would have had to have paid. It's not right.
I definitely sympathize.
They
with it. It
intended
sounds
to
like a lack
cause
of
a
justice.
loss. They tended to cause a loss. The compensation is that the person that they wanted to lose money gets that amount of money out of their hides. And if it's 200 zuz, it's 200 zuz. And once he gets it, that is what the Torah requires. Lashes, it doesn't go to benefit the person who they testified falsely against. Lashes are a straight out punishment.
Mhm. So
I'm
Zayli-
just feeling there should be an element of greater punishment in the monetary situation as well.
Right.
That's why.
So it looks like Zay, you're taking
That's just
Rava's
me.
position. Toby, you'll
Well,
take
if you
my
go to-
position that's exer sakasa beyond our comprehension. and we'll be unhappy about it. But that's the way it's
Well,
done.
if you go to an American court, you'll get punitive damages.
Right. It is funny because you do have this idea of compensation for humiliating someone as well, but you don't. There's no humiliation for just dragging him to court. There's no compensation for that. That's a good point. All right, Yasher Koach. I know sometimes we leave some
Thank
questions
you.
unanswered, but it's good that we asked them as well. All
Good
right, have a
night.
good
Thank
Shabbos,
you.
Have a
The
good
Gemara
Shabbos.
does it all the
Shabbos.
time. The Gemara does it all the time.
All the time. Yep. All right. Have a good night. Good Shabbos. Good Chodesh.